What do you know about planet Pluto? For many years, scientists assumed Pluto was just a boring, dead, frozen rock sitting quietly in the dark. No activity, no surprises, nothing interesting going on, just a cold, lifeless ball of ice that was not even worth calling a planet anymore. That is what the textbook said. That is what the experts believed. And that is exactly what NASA expected to find when they sent the New Horizons spacecraft on a 9.5-year journey to go take a closer look. They were wrong about almost everything. In July 2015, New Horizons flew past Pluto at over 31,000 miles per hour, and in those few precious hours, it captured more data and more images than anyone thought possible. What scientists saw on their screens made their jaws drop. A world that was supposed to be dead was anything but. And the facts that came out of that mission are so wild, so unexpected, and so hard to believe that even now, years later, researchers are still trying to figure out what it all means. So let us get into it. Here are the most mind-blowing things NASA found on Pluto, and a few things people still get completely wrong. The very first thing that shocked everyone was a giant heart. Not a metaphor, not a shape someone squinted at and kind of saw if they tilted their head. A massive, bright, clearly visible heart-shaped region on the surface of Pluto so large it spans roughly 1,000 miles across. Scientists named it Tombaugh Regio, after Clyde Tombaugh, the man who discovered Pluto back in 1930. The left side of this heart is a smooth, flat plain made almost entirely of nitrogen ice, and it is called Sputnik Planitia. This region alone became one of the most studied and most confusing features on the entire dwarf planet. But we will come back to why in a moment. Now, here is where people start getting things wrong. A lot of people heard that Pluto has mountains and thought, okay, sure, little hills maybe, nothing crazy. Wrong. Pluto has mountains that reach up to 11,000 feet tall. That is roughly the same height as some of the major peaks in the Rocky Mountains here on Earth. These are not gentle rolling slopes. These are massive, jagged, towering ranges of water ice that jut up from the surface like something out of a science fiction movie. And remember, this is happening on a world so far from the sun that temperatures sit around negative 380 degrees Fahrenheit. The fact that any of this exists is genuinely shocking. But here is the thing that really messed with scientists' heads. Those mountains should not be there. On other icy moons and worlds in our solar system, mountains and surface features tend to get erased over time by geological processes like the slow flow of ice. Pluto's mountains look young, geologically young. We are talking maybe 100 million years old, which in space terms is basically yesterday. Something is happening on Pluto that keeps reshaping its surface. But what? Pluto has no large moon pulling on it with tidal forces the way Jupiter's moon, Io, gets stretched and heated. There is no obvious heat source, and yet the surface is active. Scientists are still debating this, and there is no clean answer yet. Then there is the atmosphere, and this is where another massive misconception lives. People hear that Pluto is tiny and far from the sun and assume it has no atmosphere at all. It does. Pluto has a thin but real atmosphere made mostly of nitrogen, with traces of methane and carbon monoxide. And here's the wild part. When Pluto moves farther away from the sun in its long oval-shaped orbit, that atmosphere actually freezes and snows down onto the surface. When it gets closer, it thaws back out and rises up again. The whole atmosphere cycles on and off like a slow breath over hundreds of years. New Horizons also found that this atmosphere has layers of haze, similar to smog, stretching hundreds of miles up. Scientists counted around 20 distinct haze layers. Nobody expected that. Now, let us talk about color, because this one surprises almost everyone. When people think of Pluto, they often picture something gray and dull, like the moon. But Pluto is actually reddish-brown in many places, with patches of white, pale blue, and deep red. The reddish color comes from something called tholins. These are complex organic molecules that form when sunlight hits nitrogen and methane in the atmosphere. Tholins are interesting to scientists because similar chemistry might be involved in the building blocks of life. Finding tholins on Pluto does not mean there is life there, but it does mean the chemistry happening on Pluto is far more complex than anyone gave it credit for. Here is another fact that blows people away. Pluto might have a liquid ocean hiding beneath its surface. Under all that ice, models suggest there could be a layer of liquid water, kept from freezing by heat trapped inside the planet and possibly by the presence of ammonia acting like antifreeze. The evidence for this comes partly from Sputnik Planitia, that smooth nitrogen ice plain inside the heart shape. The basin it sits in appears to be perfectly positioned in a way that suggests a large mass shift happened on Pluto at some point in the past. The leading explanation is that liquid water beneath the crust redistributed and the whole planet slowly tilted to put that extra weight facing toward Pluto's moon Charon. That means an underground ocean may have literally moved the entire planet. Let that sink in. And speaking of Charon, let us clear up another thing people get wrong. A lot of people picture Pluto as alone out there in the dark, but Pluto has 5 known moons. 5. Charon is by far the largest, and it is so big relative to Pluto that scientists often call the two of them a double dwarf planet system. They orbit each other. Charon does not orbit Pluto the way our moon orbits Earth. They both orbit a point in space that sits between them, outside of Pluto itself. That is unusual. That is strange, and it tells us that whatever collision or event formed Charon in the early solar system was massive and violent. Charon itself has a dark red polar cap called Mordor Macula. Yes, like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. The name fits. Scientists think this dark patch formed because gas escaping from Pluto's atmosphere drifted over to Charon, got trapped at the cold poles, and then got cooked by ultraviolet radiation into those same dark tholins we talked about earlier. So Pluto is essentially painting its own moon with chemistry. Now, here is one that most people completely misunderstand, and it has to do with the demotion. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union voted to reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet. And ever since then, people have treated Pluto like it got kicked out of the cool kids table and became less interesting. That framing is completely backwards. The reason scientists wanted a new category was not to insult Pluto. It was because they started finding more and more Pluto-sized objects in the outer solar system. There is a whole region out there called the Kuiper Belt, and it is packed with these kinds of worlds. Pluto is actually one of the largest and most fascinating of them all. Calling it a dwarf planet is not a demotion. It is the beginning of a much bigger and weirder story about what lives at the edge of our solar system. Here is one more thing that deserves more attention. The data from New Horizons showed evidence of possible ice volcanoes on Pluto, not fire volcanoes. Ice volcanoes, also called cryovolcanoes. Instead of spewing lava, these structures may have erupted with slush, ice, and water in the past. 2 large dome-shaped mountains named Wright Mons and Pickard Mons look like they could be cryovolcanic in origin. If that is confirmed, it adds to the case that Pluto has had, and possibly still has, internal geological activity going on deep inside. A world that was supposed to be dead is looking more and more like it has a pulse. The bigger picture here is this. Before New Horizons, Pluto was a blurry dot in even the best telescopes. The most detailed image we had looked like a smudged thumbprint. Scientists had almost no idea what was actually down there, and then in one single flyby, everything changed. In a matter of hours, a frozen world went from being a forgettable footnote in astronomy textbooks to one of the most complex and mysterious places in the entire solar system. It has towering mountains, a possible underground ocean, a cycling atmosphere, ice chemistry that echoes the building blocks of life, a moon it may be painting with its own gases, and geological activity that nobody can fully explain yet. Pluto does not care that it got voted off the planet list. It has been out there for billions of years doing extraordinary things in the dark, and it will keep doing them long after every debate about its classification is forgotten. The real lesson from Pluto is not about categories or labels, it is about assumption. Scientists assumed they knew what was out there, and they were wrong. And if a world that small and that far away can surprise us that completely, imagine what else is waiting to be found. If this video made you see Pluto differently, share it with someone who still thinks it is just a boring little rock. Because the universe has a way of making fools out of anyone who calls something boring before they actually take a closer look.